Japan Up Close.
The Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Japan, is a joint venture between the World Economic Forum, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI, as well as a Japanese think tank called the Asia Pacific Initiative. It's very unique. The World Economic Forum doesn't have partnerships like this in other places. Japanese bureaucracies don't do this very often, if ever. And I think the idea, especially on the Japan side, was that Japan wanted to be a little bit more plugged into global debates about technology and technology governance. That is the main area of focus for the center. It's about not technology per se. We're not building the next generation of AI engines, but it's how do we make rules and regulations around technology so that it's used for the public good for everyone in an inclusive way and not abused. And so it's all about rulemaking, lawmaking, and all the things that governments care about. So Japan wanted to be a little bit more plugged in with global debates around these things, and also wanted to be able to move faster, because the whole kind of philosophy behind what the World Economic Forum and the Center network, which exists around the world, is doing is that at a time when technology is developing and changing so fast, traditional kinds of regulation and governance can't keep up, right? We need to be more flexible. We need to involve a whole range of stakeholders in the public sector, the private sector, academia, everywhere, in a kind of rolling, ongoing debate that helps us keep in touch and keep up with technological change. Data and how we handle it is at the core of just about everything that we're looking at the center. This is a universal issue. It's certainly not only something that Japan is grappling with, but we feel like there is also some scope for universal solutions that give different countries leeway to handle things how they and their citizens feel is best, because every country and every society is going to have a slightly different set of priorities, a slightly different weighting of values, privacy versus public good. So we're looking for solutions that can, to some degree, take in this variety, but also kind of push people towards universal best practices, as well as, to the maximum degree possible, making shared use of the resources we have. So one thing we're looking at is how do we share information across borders in a responsible way where counterparties can trust each other, even if your government doesn't have the authority in the place where you're sharing data, right? I mean, it's hard enough to trust how your data is being used domestically when your government can look, at least theoretically, everywhere at how it's being handled. But now, data is leaving your country, your information. How can we trust that it's being properly used, right? And there's a reason why we want to use data around the world, because data works when there's lots of it, and we can aggregate it and compare it with other data. And the researcher that has the potential cure for cancer may not be in your city, right? Maybe somewhere on the other side of the world, but the data that you provided to your hospital might be the key to that. So how do we manage to get the right data in the right hands, but in a way that people can trust? So that sort of thing is what we're looking at. A couple of years ago, in the Abe administration, Prime Minister Abe proposed an approach called data free flow with trust, which is kind of this overarching concept for how we can approach and balance these two issues of the need to share data, the need to not keep it all bottled up and siloed, but also to make sure that its use is well supervised, well regulated, and trusted. So how do we actually implement that in practice is the kind of thing that we're looking at. We're partnering with cities like Sapporo, for example, which is trying out some interesting new things like data exchanges, supervised data exchanges that can help kind of be intermediaries for data in a way that everybody benefits, and that is can be trusted by users of all kinds. So that's kind of what we're taking, is these big concepts and trying to find little pilot projects and principles here and there that we can then sort of test it out. And if it works, then the whole world can use it. And it's kind of our job to be the intermediaries and experimenters, if you like. So we have a smart cities team that looks at these issues. I think when people think about smart cities, they think about just the whiz bang technology of replacing roads with flying cars or something like that. But a lot of it is actually places that you can't see. A lot of it has to do with cities using data, using information in order to make regular traffic and regular cars flow better, for example, or in order to keep citizens healthier, for example. Cities are major buyers of technology and technological hardware and software, but they are doing it often in on their own. One city technology manager facing a major international technology company, trying to figure out what they have to offer, whether they're getting a good deal, how their citizens' data is going to be used. We thought it would be better if cities could band together and to create a place where they could share information about the technology providers they've dealt with, share ideas and best practices about, okay, well, we tried to implement this data system in this part of the city, but it didn't work because of this, or it worked really well because of that. Cities could pool information so that they're not just acting as one single municipal government against the whole technology industry when they're upgrading their infrastructure. So there's a project called the Global Smart Cities Alliance, which was connected to the G20 that Japan hosted a couple of years ago, that Japan put together. Now we got thousands of cities around the world who are part of this and are, again, trying to pool their knowledge and make themselves better, smarter technology users and technology procurers. So a lot of it is really about that. Again, it's not just about how can we make a really cool technology. It's about how do we govern technology, right? How do we make sure that the right technology gets used? How do we make sure that a technology is used in a way that citizens trust, in a way that everybody benefits? So it's this, again, this intersection between governance and technology that we're looking at the city level. The impact of COVID on Japan in terms of work life has been quite interesting. Other countries to some degree had already, I think, gone along the road of separating being in a place at a specific time and the output of work, right? I mean, working from home, flexible hours, telecommuting, all those things are not brand new concepts. But I think they were really only just starting to be seen in Japan when COVID hit. I mean, Japan is still, compared with other places, very much a show up, show face, be in the office kind of work culture. COVID is changing that. And I think that makes it a particularly good time then for an initiative like this Digital Garden Cities initiative. I mean, the original Garden Cities movement in England 100 or more years ago was all about trying to bring the benefits of city and country in the same place, right? So that you could have an environment where you could work and have access to infrastructure, shopping, anything you needed, like in a city, but also you had greenery, you had the Henson Garden City, right? And I think this concept is trying to make the rural areas in Japan in particular more city-like in their opportunities, in their technology infrastructure, but at the same time, so that it allows people to live where they want and still, be able to do the work that they want. And it's not just, it's not enough just to be a government initiative. Of course, companies have to get on board and sign off on their workers maybe not being at a desk from morning to night, every day. But the government is sort of taking the lead on this with this project. And I think we're already seeing some companies responding. COVID, of course, has been an accelerant for that. and I think in Japan in particular, the idea is that it could have benefits, not just for individual work-life balance, not just for corporate productivity, because we're being at a desk and having your value measured by the time you sit at a desk doesn't necessarily mean you're being productive, right? But also could have benefits in terms of equality, rebalancing the Japanese economy. I mean, Japan is very much economically and population-wise concentrated in a couple of big cities, and that's a problem when the rest of the country is therefore drained of young people, and it creates this vicious cycle where, okay, well, there's no jobs in the countryside, so the kids better go to Tokyo. Well, then there's nothing left in the countryside, so the next generation has even less reason to stay, right? So the idea is to try and reverse this a little bit, and I think it's going to be a difficult process. Tokyo particularly is just so entrenched in Japan as the center of gravity for just about everything, economy, culture, you name it. But there are opportunities in the countryside. There are people who want to do interesting things if only they had, the basic, the infrastructure they need, for example. And again, COVID especially has sort of changed people's priorities and thinking around this, where there may be new opportunities now for a policy like this to succeed where there weren't even a few years ago. Well, this is partly a question of technology, hardware, software, of course, right? There needs to be investment. There needs to be an upgrade of the actual infrastructure of technology. But it's not just about that. A lot of what is holding Japan back, I think, on this issue has to do with government itself, with laws, with regulations, with constraints that are just on paper, right? Maybe there's a regulation that says if you want to do X procedure, you have to go to Y government office and submit Z form, and then a certain number of people who are stationed in this office have to look at it and stamp it and that kind of thing, right? I mean, these are all things that could be done, remotely, could be done digitally, and the reason they're not has less to do with the fact that Japan doesn't have the technology, which of course it does, than with these rules that are in the way. I think the government estimates that there's something like 40,000 different rules and regulations that need to be reviewed and potentially changed to make them digital friendly, to make Japan, a place where you can have real digital government. And then that's one of the things that we're trying to help with. What we've been part of some government commissions who are trying to figure out the basic guiding principles for this review, right? Okay, so we got 40,000 regulations to review. What should they look like? What are we checking for? What do we want them to look like after we change them? And it's things like, well, we want to make sure that every procedure that a regulation requires can be done digitally and remotely, unless there's a really good reason not to. We want to make sure that standards and formats are the same across agencies, right? Because again, some of these roadblocks we're seeing are really simple things like, one agency uses a certain format for a form or a database, and another agency uses a different one, and we can't combine them. They can't talk to each other, right? So if Japan is going to pass a law in the future, it has to look, well, okay, is this going to require is this going to require agencies to then keep the same records and use the same format so that we can talk to each other and use this data in the future. So it's basically a set of 5 digital principles that will guide this review process, and we're involved in that. So I think that's kind of where we come in. It's the governance side of technology, right? How to make government better and more responsive to use technology for the best for everyone. I was a reporter for 15 years, and I did everything large and small. I started out looking at the currency markets, right? Following the yen day to day. And I ended up doing big things like politics and natural disasters and everything in between. And I think one of the cool things about being a foreign correspondent is you get to see a lot of different things and meet a lot of different people, because your responsibility is kind of like the whole country in a way. My big stories were not always happy stories, right? And the 2011 earthquake, tsunami, nuclear disaster, that was a big time for all journalists in Japan, and kind of brought home the sense of responsibility and importance of why we're here when something like that happens, and having an on the ground presence of reporters who can say what's happening. There's a premium on that all of a sudden, right? I was a business journalist mostly, and probably the biggest story I was involved in was the Olympus scandal, biggest for me because I was able to speak to the CEO who was fired by this company that turned out to have a big accounting scandal brewing. But it wasn't always the big stories either. Sometimes it was the small things and the places I was able to go that I wouldn't necessarily have otherwise, where I wouldn't have gone had I not had the story to report there. Going to a small town in Nagasaki to write about a quirk of the Japanese tax system that this town was taking advantage of to earn revenues, that kind of thing. And just meeting entrepreneurs who have interesting but perhaps surprising and not widely known businesses, things like that. So you get to see. I mean, I wrote obituaries. I wrote, I met, interviewed authors, wrote about films and things like that. So it really gives you a chance to see a cross section of Japan, and to firsthand, right? In a way that you wouldn't get even if I had lived here for as long as I have doing some other job. So my main work at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is sort of editing and shaping communications. We have a lot of very smart people with a lot of expertise working for us, expertise in policymaking, healthcare, law, but if what they write about isn't clear and doesn't resonate with a global audience, then we're failing in our mission. The whole idea of the center was to kind of help place Japan a little more in the center of the policymaking world globally, and so to create a bit more of a conversation. Right? I think, especially in Japan, there's a sense that policy is often made in a kind of bubble in the ministries, without enough reference to what's going on in the rest of the world, as well as not enough influence on what is going on in the rest of the world. So in order to create that conversation, you have to have good communication. So when I'm editing documents or working with our project leads to figure out what themes they should talk about to our global partners and stakeholders, that's what I have in mind. Basically, kind of putting us and putting Japan, as clearly and relevantly as possible in the center of this conversation.
Japan Up Close.